So I'm Anita Castora, and I am the secretary on the AIM board. I'm also very active in ARMA. But we have some other great people. Hold on a minute as I get it together. Bear with me. I didn't think I was going to have to talk. I was just going to munch through this meeting. So just a minute here. This will teach me to not be ready. Okay. I'm going to grab one of my meeting notes here. Okay, so we have Craig Laue is our president. We also have Bob Larrabee. Bob's been, and I don't know his title, but he is on our board of directors. He is a seasoned records and information professional with a strong technology background, so he brings a lot to the table. We also have Ray King. Ray is also on our board of directors. We have a new member, and her name, we also have Dawn Smith is on our board of directors. And then we have a new young lady, and I don't have her name in front of me. Can someone help me there? No? Okay. We will have that for you. I'll be prepared next time. But we welcome you from the Florida AIM chapter. And let me introduce B. John Masters. B. John, I'll let you talk a little bit more about yourself, but looking forward to hearing about creating a records and information management program dashboard part 2. Loved what you had for us last couple weeks ago, and anxious to learn a little bit more on what you have to share with us today. So is that okay? A good intro? Is that all right?
That's a good intro to be caught flat-footed, Anita. Thank you very much.
All right.
So briefly about me, I've been involved in AIM. When I went to my first AIM meeting, it wasn't AIM. It was the NMA. For those of you who don't know, that was the National Micrographics Association. So that's how far back I go, and I know a few of the people in the list I'm seeing over here also go back just about that far in AIM. So, but we won't name names. That gives away age, I think. I have worked in records management for many years, and for the last 20 or so as a consultant, one of those ne'er-do-well consultants. And this kind of evolved out of a need I had when I consulted to want to give an organization feedback based on the industry standards and in as objective a way as possible. And the reason being, oftentimes a records manager has to take that information and present it to people who aren't records managers. And so they're often more interested in ensuring that what you as the records manager are basing your recommendations on has some foundation, some reliable foundation behind it. And so the concept here was to create a methodology based on some of the industry standards. And we talked about that in some depth last week. But I'm just going to do a quick review of that, and then we'll jump into what's really the back end of this process, which is developing a strategic plan out of that. And I have used this methodology with a number of organizations, including a couple of very large federal agencies that act sort of globally. What developing this, as I was sort of keen on, was you establish a baseline to begin with, right? So you evaluate, now you know where you are today. And so that can serve, if you create something that's repeatable, and let me stop there and say, I'm kind of basing this around what I came up with. That doesn't mean that's perfect, nor that you shouldn't adapt it or come up with your own model. But the idea is create a model, something that's repeatable. And if you can do it period over period, whatever that is, quarterly, annually, then it can become a key performance indication for you. You can see how you're doing year over year, for example. And as I mentioned, this can help you sell your initiatives internally to your management and to gain their support. One of the areas we'll concentrate on today is how, having created a dashboard like this, you can help establish the priorities of what you need to do. So again, from last week, we talked about you have this idea of a strategy, right, that is based on some foundation of the standards that are developed out there, and we'll talk just a minute or so about those. It involves reviewing your existing policies, your training, your guidance products, and you may actually take it out and do interviews with other business units in your organization. Then you come back and develop a set of recommendations for what you want to do and an implementation timeline for those. And by the time you do all of that, it's almost time to go and start reevaluating in the second year or whatever. And again, we'll kind of see all of that. So the tools that I used are based on AIIM. As you all know, AIIM has standards and is the principles, as used to be called GARP, now they're the principles. ANSI has developed an auditing standard, and of course there's the ISO standard. So I developed my model basing it in all or in part on these, plus because I was also using the model with some federal clients, some guidance from the National Archives, but that guidance would apply to any organization, whether it's government or non-governmental. It was just good records management advice. And so the ISO standard has 7 sort of primary areas of focus. And I kind of took the main areas of focus of the other 2 items I kind of mixed and matched them as into those 7 primary ISO standards. So that's kind of what we had the whole thing based on. Now, I built an Excel spreadsheet because I'm just that way. I'm kind of retentive about that. I like to do things objectively and with numbers, and I like to build things in Excel so that I can reuse them. And so for those who requested it, I shared the Excel spreadsheet I used last week, and anyone new who would like to get it, or if you didn't ask for it last week or I somehow missed getting it to you, I'll have my email address at the end, and you can request it again. But you can see here there's a tab for each of those 7 criteria. It looks, once you get into any one of the tabs, something like this, with questions and statements related to that primary area of concern, and you score yourself or your organization, as it were, on paper records or analog and electronic records. What I did find was in many organizations there can be a distinct difference in how well they're doing managing paper records as compared to electronic records. So I wanted to be able to see that distinction if it's significant in any of the areas. You would want to know that, right? And so you score yourself. It calculates an overall average for each of the two columns, and then when you get to the bottom, it creates an average for you for that particular criteria. Now, this is just an example spreadsheet I went through and filled out, and then when you get to the end of that, it presents the information back to you in several ways. Here is one of the primary ways, and you can see the 7 criteria and how this organization that I kind of made up and just plug numbers in sort of willy-nilly matches up between electronic and analog records. And you can quickly see that in a couple of places there's a pretty good disparity between how they are managing paper records and electronic. My guess would be, and again, I made this organization up, but my guess would be this might be an older organization that is used to dealing with paper and has good solid policies and procedures for paper records management, but hasn't maybe quite caught up with the managing their electronic records yet. But again, this is kind of made up. So why would you, so you can now take that dashboard information. You now have a score. You now have an idea of what of how your organization stacks up. You might have a consultant come in and do this sort of thing for you. And listen, as a consultant, I know, and I knew with most of the organizations that I was dealing with, that they already had a pretty good idea of how they were doing and what they needed to do to improve in those areas where they might be deficient. But you're never a prophet in your own land, right? Oftentimes, management wants to hear it from the person that sort of flew in on an airplane with a briefcase in hand and is going to come in and solve all the problems. But that doesn't mean I ever thought I knew more than the people I was working with. On the other hand, though, sometimes having a third party take a look at things can bring a new perspective, and that can sometimes be helpful. That's why organizations have audit groups and why they often have outside auditors do things. So don't be afraid to get help if you can afford it. But now we take that information and let's develop a plan for it. And this is, now we're in kind of the new stuff that we didn't talk much about last week. So why would you do a plan? Well, everybody likes a little certainty. They like the idea that they sort of know what they're going to get up tomorrow and be doing. Now, any plan needs to have some flexibility built into it because sometimes the world changes. We've all sort of experienced that lately. It can help your organization set directions and priorities. It can help get everyone on the same page. These are the things I've been talking about. If you have this supported with a set of numbers like this, management tends to be able to relate to it better and sign on to it, right? Because they see that that you're being compared against industry standards, and you know, who doesn't want to do well or better against standards? So it can help drive the alignment of the organization to that. It also will help you manage time and allocate resources for things. There's an old axiom of when you plan to succeed. And that's very true. Very few people sit down and say, you know what, I think I'm going to come up with a plan on how to fail. Unless, of course, you're the Florida Department of Reemployment or whatever. Apparently, that was their idea to develop a plan to fail. But most organizations don't. So if you build a plan with success in mind, and then you execute on that plan, you're much more apt to succeed. When you're just reacting to things, you're really acting on the plan of someone else, a third party outside your control, and that's never good. So I'm back to taking that table out of our Excel spreadsheet and taking a look at how that organization scored overall. And we can see right here their worst score was under the monitoring and training criteria for electronic records. So obviously, as I develop my plan, I need to think about ways to improve this score. This is clearly a problem. What things do I do to address that? Now, we do have an average there of 2.6 because it looks like we're doing a good bit better when it comes to our paper records. Up here is actually the lowest overall average score, and that's in policies and procedures. So again, obviously, that's an area we need to be thinking about, right? We're not doing so great, especially with electronic records there. Here are a couple other low scores under electronic records for classification plan effectiveness and inactive program effectiveness. However, if we take a look at the overall averages, our average was 2.9, and we have 4 criteria where we were at or below our average score. So I would suggest to you that those need to be priorities that you address in your strategic plan very specifically. Now, that doesn't mean you ignore the other areas, but I think that most of us don't have unlimited resources. If you work for an organization that does have unlimited resources, please unmute your phone and identify yourself. Some of us may need a job. And you obviously have money, but most don't. So I'm simply saying here, this is how you begin to establish priorities for projects and for seeking funding, because you're not going to get all the funds to do everything you want in year 1. So I would suggest these are the 4 areas that may need the most attention. Again, though, let me emphasize, that doesn't mean you ignore the other areas, okay? So I gave a homework assignment last week, and I asked everybody to just think up any suggestion for something that they might want to do in their organization that they think needs to be done, and I got none. So I made them up myself. And so here's what I came up with: a list of possible programs or actions. And you can see I've divided that between technology and governance items. And governance, to me, a governance item is a policy or procedure or training, something that doesn't involve buying licenses or hardware, software licenses or hardware, probably. So you can see those, some go hand in hand. For example, I said, if you're going to put in an electronic records management system, you need to have some way to back up that system. Well, then that means you need to develop a backup plan. So one is a technology solution, one is a governance item, right? And again, this probably wouldn't be the entire list I would come up with for that organization. I kind of quit once I filled the slide up, just to be honest about it. But this is where you sit down with you and any staff you have or management, and you kind of spitball and you say, here are the areas we're most concerned about, but this is the entire list of areas we need to think about. What kind of things do we think we could do that would make our records management program better? Just put everything on the list, because it's then later going to get prioritized, right? So it doesn't mean anything's a bad idea or that you'll never do it. It just means you may not do it next quarter, right? Because you likely have limited resources. So here I took those 4 criteria that we're most concerned about, the ones where we had the lowest scores. And by the way, they're ranked here from the lowest score to the highest score of the 4 lower. And here's that list we made. And so then we sit down and we take a look at this list and we start mapping it. And we say, okay, an auto classification or categorization program, an electronic program like ActiveNav or IBM has a system, so all the major players have something now. That would probably help us with the effectiveness of our classification plan, right? If records are getting properly classified in the system, then the plan is obviously getting executed better, right? But that doesn't mean those are the only criteria that this would help with. This might help with our monitoring and training, obviously with our monitoring, because we would have reporting and all. And it might help with security and protection, because it's categorizing records correctly to get the proper security applied to them based on what's in them. This also might apply to any of the other 3 criteria that aren't showing here. But we begin to map these things. So we also want to get us an electronic records management system. That would help us with security and protection, because now we're collecting our official records in a repository. They're under better records management control. But that's also going to help us again with classification and monitoring, right? So we're just mapping these, and just because it helps one area a lot doesn't mean it doesn't help some of the others. and here you can see, if we integrate the system with our line of business applications within the organization, that might help us in these criteria. And again, in some of the other 3 that aren't on our list here. The same is true for our governance ideas, right? Let's say we want to start doing regular audits of our records management program within the organization. That's certainly going to help us with a lot of the areas, but very particularly probably these 3 at least. So that may be something we
want. Some tuna fish, son?
And so now we see that we have, you could really create quite a mishmash.
And there's pickles and carrots.
Hi, would the person ordering their sandwich mute maybe?
Egg sandwich.
Okay.
Hello. Hello, egg salad or tuna. Please mute your, please mute your line. You're making us hungry. Thank you.
Yeah, I was going to say I haven't had lunch yet, so you were distracting me significantly there.
Sorry about that. It said when I logged in, it said I was already muted. Sorry about that.
That's no problem at all. But you can see, if you did this mapping, obviously you could kind of create quite a spaghetti mess if you did it this way. I did it this way because it lends itself to the visual media we're looking at. But when I would do a report for a client, I would put the criteria from the methodology in a column, and then in another column I would have numbered all of these ideas and would put them in here. When you do this, can you begin to see how a priority list might begin to occur? Now, the priorities are based not just on this, but it's things like, okay, if we do this item, we help with policies and procedures, which is where we seem to be doing the worst. So obviously that creeps to the top of the list. But let's say that's the only area that helps us in. But one of our other concepts here, one of our other possible projects helps us not only there, but in 3 other areas. So now if I can get money to do one of those 2 things, I may want to do the one that helps in policies and procedures, plus the other 3 or 4 that it helps with. Does that make sense to you all? So you're looking kind of at it from that perspective. There becomes a little bit of art to this here too. So how many areas does it impact? Is it impacting our more deficient criteria that we're looking at? And by the way, obviously cost is always a consideration, and other available resources. I can want to do all of these things starting as soon as we all reopen from the lockdown, right? But I only have 2 or 3 people. We can't do all of these at one time. So it's you know, what do I have the resources for? Do I have resources I can use from someone else? Can I hire contractors to do any of it? And what are overall corporate initiatives that are going on in your organization? Do any of these things pretty clearly attach to overall corporate initiatives? You'd have a good chance. Here's where the art comes in again, the politics of it all. The bosses are going to like to hear that you've got to bolt on to the corporate initiative, right? So those tend to get funded more easily. So all of those things, but if you have created this mapping, when you present this overall plan and your budget requests, managers tend to glom onto this better because they see that a lot of thought was put in it. And yeah, it makes sense. Wow, if we just do this one thing, we'll improve our score on 7 of these criteria, right? So why wouldn't we do that? It becomes the concept. So here's where you take the score, you take your ideas for how you would address all of those areas, and particularly those where you're deficient, and create a prioritized list of projects and acquisitions. And so then you can build a plan from that. Excuse me. I'm gonna take a drink there. So we're going to do some technology things, and we're going to start with a proof of concept. Now, here's another, this is me putting my consultant hat on for a minute and telling you that a lot of times a good way to do an initiative that you want to use is to start with a proof of concept, right? It's very hard to get an organization to want to invest several $1,000,000 in an enterprise-wide records management system, but they might very well do a proof of concept. At IMC, we had developed a small starter package for IBM FileNet. Now, if any of you have ever had any experience with any IBM, let alone their FileNet records manager, you know it ain't cheap and to get your feet wet. But we came up with like a 5-user package, where we gave them a FileNet resource for like 4 weeks or something to install it and configure it to the extent they could within that 4 weeks. It was a fixed price, and we worked with IBM for special pricing, and it was $49,995. As you might imagine, that's because there's one of those magical lines for the federal government between 49,999 and 50,000. So we wanted to stay right under that threshold because the procurement rules changed a lot. But be that as it may, oftentimes you can get a proof of concept done. Once you get a system in the door, it's a little easier then to roll it out over time. But that's part of planning, right? Would it benefit us? Who could we start with? What's some low-hanging fruit where we could show a significant business case and an improvement in operations, right? So if we start with a proof of concept, we might want to also start with a smaller proof of concept of an automatic classification system, right? And if that's all going very well, now we might want to integrate with our ERP system and maybe Outlook to bring email in, right? Because none of you all out there have any concerns about how email's managed in your organization, I'm sure, but some organizations do. And then you'd want to be ingesting from other repositories within the organization. So this is how you're sort of planning and laying that out. And you can assign dollars to each of these blocks, dollars and resources. And then, of course, you want to just begin an enterprise-wide rollout. Obviously, as we mentioned, if you're going to have a records management system, you need a backup solution to go along with that. And then there are those governance ideas that we came up with. So you're always going to continue existing initiatives, which may be on your list. And let's say you decide, yes, we really do need to do an audit every year. So we're going to plug that in. This is like about a 3-year plan here. So we're going to plug in an audit the first quarter of each year. And then you plan for that audit. How are you going to do that? Are you going to do it within your office? Are you going to ask your internal auditors to include that? That's lining up resources, right? Can internal or even your external auditor include a records management audit when they do their audit? And if that's the case, you need to begin planning with those other parts of the organization and being sure the resources are available for it. We might decide we need to do training for our divisional records liaisons. So we want to put that in place. And that's got an error because that's just going to be one of those ongoing things that you have to do all the time. Then we say, well, if we're going to do an audit, we're probably going to revise policies and procedures after each audit because there will be likely some findings that we'll want to address. So we probably need to build a regular legal review in once we respond to audit findings. So we're going to plug that in. And by the way, since we're getting a backup solution for our records management system, we've got to develop a plan for that and then monitor that. Now, I didn't bother to put all of those things in this chart here once again, mainly because of just limitations of screen size. But I hope you get the idea, and I hope this is making some level of sense to you about how you can take what we talked about last week, which was any method that you come up with to sort of objectively score your organization, and then use that to build a priority list of your initiatives, and then turn that into kind of a strategic plan that lays out across multiple years where you can then assign money and resources. If you do that and take that to your management, I promise you, you have a much better chance of getting approval, especially for the resources that you need. Again, you probably never get everything you want, but I think you'll improve your batting average pretty significantly if you try with this kind of extended planning. And again, where it's clearly tied to industry standards, right? It's hard for your manager to argue with those, right? So that's my suggestion. Now, as you do this, I don't know where, I don't remember, I've used this for so long, I don't even remember where I found it. But this is an idea of how you should treat every block that's on the previous slide. Every one of those initiatives, you should kind of go through these steps. In some cases, if it's a larger project, you may want to do this more formally. I like to try to do it in my head even for smaller, less significant things. But it's where you start out and you plan what you want to do and you do the necessary research. For example, getting your electronic records management system, right? That's going to involve some planning, even if you're doing, again, just a proof of concept initially, right? You want to know, you know, what are we going to proof in the POC, right? What area are we going to touch with it? So what do we need in order to do that? And you can work with your vendors and perhaps send out an RFI and get sample project plans and things from them to get a sense of, you know, is this bigger than a bread box kind of thing? And then design that initiative, get stakeholders and management to sign on to it, and then go implement it. Do what you said you were going to do. Get the resources, plan for the rollout, and then deliver it. Do what you said. But once you do that, it's equally as important to evaluate it once it's in the field, as it were, and be sure that it's accomplishing what you hoped it would accomplish, and that you believe it's going to improve that score, because now you've kind of hung your hat on your evaluation methodology. And as I said, that can be you know, a key performance indicator. So a year from now, you're going to do it again. You hope all those numbers are a little higher. So you want to evaluate and make sure that you did accomplish that. and then you're going to revise it if it's not doing it as well as you expected, or so you're going to adjust that, and then you know, you're going to iterate back around through the process again as you roll it out further, or if you're moving on to your next block on the plan, whichever the case may be. So I hope this all made sense. Again, I know it's often things that you already know, but sometimes getting that reminder can be helpful. And help you get your thoughts organized. I hope you got some ideas that you can take away and use. And as I said, my email address is on here. My link at LinkedIn as well. Feel free to contact me through any of those channels, and I'll share today's slide deck, last week's if you'd like, as well as the spreadsheet that I use. But that's all I have. Please feel free to ask any questions if anybody has any.
Thank you, Bijan. Yeah, we'll. I now have better audio. Sorry about
Craig's
that.
and we can hear him now.
Yeah. It indicated that my system resources were low all of a sudden, right? And you and I were having a great chat before, so. Tech and Murphy's Law combined. So everyone feel free to unmute yourselves for any questions. And for Bijan here, I'm sure with all of this excellent content, our great group of participants here today will have questions. So if you prefer to send them through the chat, that's okay too. But go ahead and ask any questions. We'll just wait a few seconds, see if there are any. Feel free.
John,
Hi, this is Anita. Oh, go ahead. I'll wait.
No, this is Bob. I'm just jumping in to say, well done, John. It was an awesome series that you put together here, and I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks. That means a lot coming from you, Bob.
And this is Anita, and I was just going to say the same thing. I have screenshots. I'm going to request your information, and yeah, we know a lot of this, but I love you have some really some good nuances and some some different techniques that I think I can take back with me and utilize in my office. And I'm hoping that some of the others attending picked up a little bit of your brilliance. But I bet you do so you did an awesome job. So thanks so much.
Thanks. And again, I'm not saying this is the be all end all. I'm hoping that my tools could perhaps serve as a jumping off place for you to be able to start your own tool if you wanted to do that, or take mine and adapt it specifically to your organization. But I'm very happy to do that.
And yes, actually, I'll chime in, John, to say, these are fantastic guidelines, and with your expertise applied, something that I know, up and down the list of attendees, participants here today are certainly going to find very useful. We will make the recording available to everyone, and just to let everyone know, we're currently working on our AIIM Florida website. So once that's completed, which we know that's no minor undertaking, that we will make the presentations of recordings available, as well as future recordings there, so that it become a resource point for our members and prospects across the state. So I did want to help out a little bit here in addressing this hardworking board. And I know, Anita, I put you on the spot, and I sincerely apologize. I was switching headsets and trying to see what worked while doing that, and I apologize for that. So let's start. So I'm Craig Laue, the AIIM Florida Chapter Board President. Bob Larrabee, you just heard from a few moments ago. Bob is our Vice President. Anita, you heard from. Anita helps on events and is Board Secretary. And Dawn Smith is not able to make it today. She's a director on the Board Events Committee. And new to our board is Alex Kelly, Social Media Director. And welcome aboard, Alex, from the company Tenchel. And Ray King from Dell Technologies is a board director. And not with us today is Marco Solanpa. Marco is a past president and board advisor, and with the Gartner company. So you can read more about them, as we'll be profiling each and every one, actually starting with Anita in this month's newsletter. So we'll have that in circulation to everyone, and there's just a lot going on. So the editing and processing and so forth takes a little longer than usual. But important to note, just as B. John Masters has so greatly done here in this series with regards to Creator Records and Information Management Performance Dashboard, we'll also start a cloud series. So AWS, Amazon Web Services, Joe Sambuco, who is their digital transformation leader, will be with us in 2 weeks on Thursday, May the 21st. And we're starting where we should start, at Cloud 101. Really, what are the steps to take in bringing on cloud, or using cloud as a service? Bring your info and data to the cloud. Is it secure? Is it not? So he'll address those questions, and as the first of a series sponsored by Amazon Web Services with the help of Jefferson Frank. So looking forward to having all of you back with us on Thursday, May the 21st at 1 p.m. Eastern. So with that, if there are still any questions, there's some in the chat, and I'm not, because of my resources, I'm not able to click on it. So if someone would do that and see what questions or comments there.
I'm taking a look here. Don't seem to be any questions there.
Hey, Craig, this
All
is Ray. I do have a question.
All right.
For
Yes, sir.
Hey, Bijan, great information as always. We certainly appreciate the time and effort that you put into it and providing some really good foundational information for our constituents. One thing I wanted to ask you is, aside from doing presentations like this, do you provide workshops? So if there's any customers or anyone a part of AIM that wants a little bit more information, a little more hand-holding, a little bit more time in front of you, is this something that you offer?
I would be happy to discuss that with anybody that was interested. Yes.
Wonderful.
That's excellent. That's excellent. Thank you, Ray, for bringing that up. Absolutely. And I know we have quite a few records managers across the state on with us here today. So most definitely, I'm sure, of huge value. And I know in the ARMA community that Anita is also hugely involved in, great interest for potentially combining there as we hope that someday as COVID-19 winds down, ceases, and we can all get back face to face again, that hopefully we can do something in conjunction with AIM, with the Bijan Masters aboard. So with that, we will conclude our session number 2. And again, the recordings are available. Feel free to reach out to bijanmasters@gmail.com for any copies of the presentation, of any of the recording information if you do not get it from us, and feel free. And again, we thank you for your participation. Sorry for the technical glitches. Once again, we're crossing our fingers that it recorded properly with all of that, but we trust that it did. So I wish you all a great afternoon, and please be safe in your journeys. Bye now.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks, Greg. Everyone, have a good afternoon.
You're very welcome.
Bye-bye.
Take care now.
Thank you. Nice job. Bye.